Welcome to Resource PNG. This week we join Brian Gomez with part 2 of a panel discussion on falling commodity prices and its impact on industry and country. The discussions this week begin with an insight into the effect of low commodity prices on government revenue.
The PNG budget started to come under some pressure from around 2012 when copper and gold prices first fell. Dr. Temo, could you explain to viewers what the link is between mineral prices and how revenues and profits and falling prices affect government revenues and eventually the national budget of the country?
There is a direct link, as you would expect, between commodity prices and government revenue, because the government sets out a budget and makes certain assumptions about commodity prices. And based on these prices, the government then projects how much tax revenue, how much duties, and all of that it needs to collect. So there is a direct link. For the 2016 budget, I've looked up the assumptions for gold, copper, and oil. Gold is at $1,207 US per ounce. Copper is at 2.71. And oil is at $45 per barrel. So if you compare those to the prices current prices that we have discussed previously, gold is currently at 2,270, I think. So the price is above the assumed price for the budget. Copper is at $2.17, so it's slightly lower than the budget, and oil is at 37, so it's slightly lower than the budget. So depending on where we end up during the year, there is likely to be either a deficit in the amount of revenue that is generated from the resources sector, based on where the prices are towards the end of the year. But as it sits, the prices seem to be, pretty spot on or close, within a couple of, dollars out of the assumed price. So I think government revenue under those conditions are probably okay. I guess the other important influence is the LNG price, and I think the budget I recall for or the assumed price for under the budget for LNG was about $10. I'm not sure what the current price is. So
somewhere between $7 and $8.
Okay, so it's slightly lower. So again, there is pressure on the government in terms of revenue flow from the resources sector because of the commodity prices.
I see. What has been the reaction of industry in these past 3-4 years to this fall off in commodity prices? And are companies a bit more able to look with optimism to the future?
Yeah, look, I think I suppose at the drop of the commodity prices, the companies that acted quickly, I think took cost out of their businesses by reducing numbers of employees. So there was a retrenchment or a resizing of their workforce. So that was the first sort of area that was addressed. After that, from our own operations, we also had ongoing discussions with our contractors to look at how we could perhaps improve the rates that were provided for us via those contracts, and work together with them because of the understanding that the market had shifted. And so in order for us to sustain these operations, they needed to be a partner in the decisions we made in terms of just driving greater efficiencies within these services that they were providing us. So I think overall, from my knowledge of all the operations, I think that's pretty much what we all did. We dropped our workforce numbers. We negotiated with our suppliers and our contractors to get greater control over our costs, and thereafter we just made sure that those were managed going forward, so that you were able to in a sense control your operating costs while the uncertainty of the price sort of stabilised.
Mr. Botten, once again, Oil Search is in a rather unique position because since 2014, even though LNG prices have fallen below expectation, your company's production has increased virtually fourfold due to the impact of LNG production. As a result of that, compared to the past, you're still sustaining your levels of revenue, profits, and indeed payments of tax to the government. But like other companies, both here and abroad, Oil Search has also gone through a period of rationalization. Some in the public might wonder, with a big company like that, a lot of revenue, why do we need to cut jobs? Can't you just hang on to them for longer?
Well, I suppose what you have seen, although we're making record production, what was going to be record revenue is no longer record revenue because the price of oil has come down by almost twofold. And in reality, your price of LNG has also been dramatically hit. So the expectations of revenue has been hit enormously. Our business is very dependent on the price of oil. So every dollar rise of oil means an before tax profit of about $40 million hit on profit. So one positive dollar means $40 million of before tax profit. So overall, like everybody else, we've had to reduce our costs, and in a similar way, that does include, unfortunately, a reduction in the workforce. And though our numbers have been smaller in terms of reduction than many of our Australian other companies in Australia, we've also driven efficiencies. So we're actually producing more. So not only from the LNG, but also from our oil business, we're actually trying to get our barrels out more efficiently. And that has a whole series of initiatives which allows us to deliver those barrels in a cheaper way. And of course, you have a certain amount of fixed cost in your business. So if you can produce more barrels against the fixed cost, you actually improve your profitability. So frankly, the oil business at $110 a barrel got slack. It was fat, it was not particularly efficient, the contractors weren't efficient, and a number of projects in the world, certainly in Australia, were commissioned at an unsustainably high oil price. This clean out of the oil business, oil and gas business, is actually going to bring a fitter, leaner and more efficient business. And I hope when the oil price does go up, it may not go to 110 anytime soon, we don't bring back the same inefficiencies, the same slackness into our business. I don't think we will. But at the end of the day, it is commonly about people, and whenever you do lay people off, that's always a very hard thing to do. Across the oil and gas industry overall, something like 30% of the total oil and gas employees worldwide have been laid off. That's a lot of people, and a real tragedy for the young people caught up in that exercise.
Generally, prices still remain quite low, and around the world there's a lot of pessimism about the resources sector. But after the restructuring and everything that's gone on, I sense that maybe PNG-based companies are still fairly optimistic about the immediate future. Is that a right assumption, Dr. Tem?
Yes, given the kind of cleanup that has occurred in many of the operations, not only in terms of numbers, but also for us in the mining sector, the capital spend, there's been a fair bit of cutback on that that will allow us to maintain our margins to continue to operate in PNG.
Mr. Aitzi?
Yeah, look, Brian, I think our operations here, from my knowledge of them, have reacted fairly quickly, and most of them have now got good control over their costs, and as a result, I think are a lot more resilient than some of the others that operate. But I think one thing that we need to emphasise from an industry point of view is that during these types of downturns within the global economy, we as operators and the government as the regulator or the licensee need to work even closer together so that we can, in a sense, make PNG and the economy of PNG even more efficient, and as a result maintain those revenue flows that government relies on. And in our earlier discussions that we spoke about the impact or the effect of poor capacity or the poor capacity of government to translate some of these income streams or revenues that they generate. So from an industry point of view, I encourage government particularly to realise the importance of this sector because of the kind of income that it generates from it. And as a result of that importance, government to elevate its support for this sector and to be able to, in a sense, understand that during these downturns, sectors such as the resource sector need to be supported in order for those job numbers to be maintained, because ultimately the employment that's carried through these resource sectors returns a significant amount of revenue back to the government in the form of salaries and wages tax, which is, I think, makes up around about 30% of their revenue each year within the budget. So, I mean, that's the sort of relationship between the performance of the sector and its direct impact on the government's income stream.
Mr. Botten, with oil prices at $37 a barrel and LNG also at a low, much lower than you would have expected just 2 or 3 years ago, do you still feel a sense of optimism about the immediate future?
Look, I think PNG's oil and gas sector is actually really well placed to ride this storm and actually benefit from it. The fields in PNG, the fiscal regimes, the whole package that is PNG operations, both in oil and gas for production, is actually pretty robust in these downturns. And therefore our profitability on a per barrel basis is worldwide competitive. So we actually can still deliver tax, we can still deliver revenues and royalties to the state and the country, even at relatively low. Our break even on a cost per barrel basis is one of the lowest, certainly for LNG. So we think we're, with the reduced cost, more efficiency, and also, dare I say it, less competition around the world, because higher cost projects are not going to be sanctioned in this environment. And PNG, when it looks to the future and looks to expand its both oil and gas sector, the LNG sector specifically is very competitive for expansion of PNG LNG, very competitive for the development of Papua LNG, and if those projects can cooperate together, can make revenues and profitability even better. And there's never a better time at a $40 a barrel oil price to maximise the cooperation that projects can work together to deliver greater value, and the biggest winner of that is the state. So I am actually optimistic that PNG will come out stronger and will actually ride this storm well in comparison to many countries around the world. But we have to weather that storm, and we have to manage our cash flows, because one of the things that does get impacted in these downturns is medium and long-term exploration. And that does sooner or later stop resources coming in to be developed, and I think that's an area of focus for a range of companies now. Some of the smaller companies don't have the money to explore, and I think that's something that needs to be looked at, and certainly Oil Search itself is going to be looking at expanding its judiciously its exploration activities so that we can see resources coming to the market in 5, 7, 8 years' time. That's the cycle that we're in, and if you stop exploration, you know you'll be short resources in that time frame.
How should governments be reacting to these changes? Are there lessons that we can learn from other countries or from our past experience? Dr. Temu, you've seen in the copper industry has been tremendous change all around the world, and a country like Chile, which produces I think almost a third of the world's copper, has been providing subsidies to some of their smaller copper producers to keep their employment and other levels up. But this creates a global problem because oversupply is hard to tackle. How do you read the situation?
My view is government has to be part of the process in dealing with the downturn. Not specifically in terms of, like the Chilean example, providing subsidy, but the government for PNG at this stage, one of the big issues for the country or for the economy is cash flow and forex, foreign exchange. And in a downturn like this, it is critical that producing projects must continue to produce because they are the ones that are supplying the revenue for government. So I see government as in playing its part. It needs to support projects that produce in terms of the areas that they look after. A big one in this country is the Highlands Highway. There have been reports, I've seen reports in the last couple of weeks that there are significant slips along the Highlands Highway and there is no cash to try and sort these problems out. If we don't fix the Highlands Highway, the projects that generate the revenue are not going to generate any more revenue. So it's important that the government focuses on those areas and help resolve those issues that allow projects to continue producing so that we get the cash flow and the forex for the country. A bright spot there is as you probably heard, there was a big landslip in Porgera a couple of weeks ago. We engaged with government, the provincial government in particular with their works department have come out in full force and supported the repair work that has allowed now the road to be open because Porgera was looking at only a couple of days of fuel. If the road was not fixed, we would have completely shut down for lack of fuel. We had to let people go because there was not the ability to move in and out was not there. The supplies were not coming through. But fortunately, the government, through the provincial government, moved pretty quickly to try and help us resolve that. So that's an example of what the government can do to try and ensure that projects continue to operate.
Mr. Botten, last year the government revenues fell by more than 2 billion kina, and a large part of this, of course, was the effect of falling commodity prices and the flow-on impacts. We know from the global scene that there are many countries much worse off. The case of Nigeria, Venezuela, where maybe 80–90% of their budget is dependent on the one commodity, and Saudi Arabia running down their sovereign wealth fund. What are some of the reactions that these countries have taken that maybe we can learn from, and how do you read what the government has done so far?
Look, there are, as you say, there are many countries that are suffering from commodity price downturns and a dramatic drop in revenue streams. Some of those countries have reacted by cutting investment and cutting services. Some of the ones in Africa, certainly in South America, have done that fairly heavily. I think PNG's taken a pretty measured view. They continue to want to invest in key infrastructure, and you see that around the country, not just in Moresby. Moresby certainly gets the lion's share, but around the country there are projects that continue to have investment from government funds. They are endeavouring in using the resources that they have to address some of the service delivery issues that are clearly prevalent around the country. And I think they've also made, I think, a very strong statement in the fact that they don't want to change the fiscal regime and the fiscal terms for resources at this stage, knowing full well that if that happened, that would drive away investment very, very quickly. And I think those initiatives, I think by government, as Dr. Temu has said, has allowed us to continue to produce and actually make even more production, at least in the oil and gas space, than previously. I think stability is very important for all our investments at the moment, and it's very easy for a head office that might sit overseas somewhere to say this country is going for more tax at exactly the wrong time. I'm going to pull out my investment, my future investment in that country. And PNG's resisted doing that, and they should be congratulated for it.
I guess if we look at the resources front, the mineral sector seems to be making a little bit of a comeback. You know, Octedi, of course, closed because of the drought, but they're back in production. And with gold prices now at 1,200, which Dr. Temu, as you pointed out, is in line with the budget expectation, do you see any prospect that maybe this year there'll be a little more revenue from the sector into government coffers?
Well, we'd hope so. I mean, the indicators are there, but I think, to your point earlier about how government can support the sector, I think a lot of it is about maintaining that stable fiscal environment that these operators will be able to live under. Also, in terms of the regulatory support that the government provides the sector as well, to ensure that there's consistency there's predictability, so that as the operators face these global sort of shifts, at least on the home front, we can be a bit more, perhaps confident about the kind of environment that we face at home. And I think that's probably the key message here, is that if government can realise that in a global downturn, it's incumbent on all of us as partners here to be able to work together. So maintaining a competitive and a stable fiscal environment, maintaining a predictable and a equitable regulatory environment as well, and then also looking at how it can perhaps encourage operators that are already in place to be able to maintain and grow their activities. Exploration, as Peter mentioned, is not just an overnight activity. You make investments now, and particularly in the mineral space, from finding the deposit to the eventual production can take anything up to 40 years. So the government needs to be mindful of that. I mean, you look at it in terms of the current engine rooms, if you like, within the mineral space. You have Octedi, Porgera, Lihia, and Ramu Nickel. There's 4 operators currently within the mineral space. Now, in a downturn, the first thing that sort of, in a sense, gets impacted is the exploration budget. So, if we don't support that exploration space, then the cycle for us to continue to sort of grow that income from the mineral sector is also impacted in the longer term. So we need to make sure that we as a group, both government and the resource sector and our communities, are working together.
Mineral exploration has fallen quite dramatically over the last 3 years. How much of that do you think is due to industry concerns about the proposed changes to the Mining Act? Dr. Temu?
It's probably had an impact on investor confidence in making their decisions to come in and invest. As you know, the investment dollar, we have to compete globally. PNG has to compete globally. There is no reason why someone will come and invest if he can get a better return somewhere else.
What aspects of the changes is the industry most concerned about, do you think?
I think there's some proposals to increase royalties. The fiscal side, there is also the equity, changes to the equity provisions to increase from in the mining side from current 30 to additional 20 based on commercial terms. So some of these things are likely to, reduce the confidence of
but
companies.
for many members of the public, when it said that you go from 30% to 50%, but the 20% is purchased on commercial terms, a lot of people think, oh, that should be satisfactory. So why is the industry so upset about this kind of change?
Well, the investor also has to have its share of the return for its investment. But I think the key issue is how competitive those changes are relative to the rest of the world. Once we reduce the competitiveness of what we have here, we won't attract the investment dollar, and political leaders and landowners can argue that we need a bigger share. But if there is zero investment, there is nothing that can come out of a bigger share. So I think the thing that we need to get right is we need to protect our competitiveness compared to the rest of the world, because that's the only way that we can develop resources in this country. PNG needs to develop its resources to fund its development. There is no other way we can fund the development of our country. Resources in the ground are of zero value to anyone. So unless there is investment to take this thing out, we can't be arguing for 30% or 50% or whatever, because 50% of zero is always zero.
On the oil exploration front, much of the recent and current activity has been held up because of the moving towards feasibility of the Papua LNG project, and also with the expectations that the PNG LNG project might want to build a third train and expand. What is the risk that if current prices remain low, that exploration, besides these two prospects, is going to falter?
Well, I think it is actually already faltering, and a large number of licenses in PNG are held by some of the smaller companies, and the equity markets and equity funding for those small companies has dried up. And if you look at the various commitments in various licenses around the country, there are many hundreds of millions of kina of commitments that just aren't funded right now. So we think that's a concern for the medium and long-term health of the country, because without that exploration and appraisal work, you don't get, as Dr. Temu said, you don't get the development, and the resources will stay in the ground. The good thing about Papua New Guinea is it has two significantly attractive projects there now. Clearly, the performance of PNG LNG in increasing its base production from what it's already built has been an outstanding success. What we now need to do for both projects, PNG LNG and for Papua LNG, is to confirm the resources that can underwrite the next phase. And that's what's happening with the drilling going on in the Highlands and the drilling going on at El Cantaloupe this year. So at least PNG LNG and Papua LNG are in a very competitive space to be able to compete for future LNG markets, hopefully over the next 2 to 3 years, and take that to commissioning. But it is a very, very competitive market right now. There are many projects out there that are fighting for the same customers. So that stability is of critical importance, and allowing us to do our work to prove up the resources, bring on and work with the landowners and other community areas is so important for our success.
With that, we bring it to an end this segment, and viewers will be back shortly. Welcome back, viewers. In this segment, the panel will discuss what does the future hold for the PNG resources sector. And I've returned to Mr. Aetsi, and maybe he can tell us about some of the exciting new prospects that are advancing quite well, such as the Wafi-Golpu project being undertaken by his own company, Newcrest, with their South African partner, Harmony, as well as the Frida River project, and maybe there's some others that may be looking for better times.
In terms of the mineral space, Brian, there are probably two reasonably advanced projects, and that is the Wafi-Golpu project in Morobe province, the one that Newcrest and Harmony are partnering in. And the other is the Feeder River project, and that's being led by Panost with the partnership with Highlands Pacific. So those two projects, I think, are probably the ones that are the most advanced. I think both of them have taken feasibility studies to their boards, and they've been released to the market now. The Panost one I think will be released in June, but both Newcrest and Harmony have already provided a feasibility study to the market for stage one. The Yandara project I think is a little further away, but is an exciting prospect as well. So, I mean, I think those are the three that I think would probably attract some attention and create a bit of excitement within our industry.
Dr. Temu, minerals exploration, as we just discussed, has been badly hit. How soon can we expect a recovery, and what are some of the key factors required for such a recovery?
The price, I guess, is a big factor in exploration, especially in terms of the availability of funding for exploration programs. Now, that's not going to happen in the next couple of years, in a sufficient way to encourage exploration work in PNG. Our own experience from Barrick point of view, Barrick came into PNG very excited to try and find the next big mine. We spent a whole lot of money to try and do that, but one of the biggest frustrations was getting onto the ground to start a drilling program. In many of our licenses, we never really completed our drilling programs because of issues with landowners, issues with law and order, issues with logistics, and a company cannot really wait around to try and spend the money and twiddle its thumbs to wait until these issues get resolved. So Barrick basically pulled the plug and pulled out. And I think the lesson is that when exploration's license is issued by the government or the regulator, it needs to protect that license and do all it can to ensure that the work program for that license is done. Many times we found that there was no support from the regulator to try and complete the work program that you had. You were left on your own to try and sort out all those issues that impact your ability to complete a program. So I think those are the kind of things that need to be sorted out. Again, I mean, one of the bigger issues for us in this country, we talk about the risk of, a downturn in prices, but I think in the mining space right now, the bigger risk is the proposed changes in legislation, in the laws. We have political leaders who are arguing for a bigger share of the resource pie through legislation. We have bureaucrats who are not providing professional advice to that statement at the political level. They are going along with it and putting to them what they want to see so that they can be satisfied. I think there is a serious problem there. The professionals need to provide political leaders with professional advice as to the likely impacts of changes that have been proposed. As I said earlier, 50% of zero is zero. We need to attract the investment first. And to attract the investment, we need to compete with everyone else out there. It's not just us. People are not waiting in line to come to PNG. So we need to set the conditions right so that we can compete for this exploration dollar and get it in and make sure that we spend it and the programs are completed so that the next set of mines that need to replace the existing ones can be found.
Mr. Botton, in this low price environment, Oil Search is still very keen on expansion, and you have, in a sense, your foot in two different opportunities. How do you weigh up, if the case arises, which one you might prefer over the other?
I don't prefer any of my children. I love them all. Okay. So in reality, both projects make a lot of sense. The expansion of PNG LNG is probably easier because it frankly is building on something that's already built. It's always easier to finance. It's always easier to sell gas into customers because they know you've been reliable. If you start from scratch, as Papua LNG is doing, it's more challenging. But we've done that before. We did that in 2009. So Papua LNG's got a great resource base. It's got a very, very good operator in Total, and frankly, it can be brought to market in a very competitive way. Both those projects can compete in this very difficult market, and probably, I think most analysts outside PNG would say that of all the LNG projects that are sitting there in the wings, those two projects, an expansion and Papua LNG, are the ones that are actually going to get up over the next 3 to 5 years. So I think we're sitting pretty well in the market, and I also think there's some interesting small-scale opportunities and important opportunities in power. For gas usage, certainly there's gas now being used to fire the power generator in more speed.
Because Oil Search is also involved in a few other initiatives. For example, the Morro Bay Power Project.
Yeah.
Maybe you can give us a bit of a rundown on some of these initiatives you're taking.
Well, I think
power is desperately needed in this country. Too few people have access to electricity.
Yeah, depending on which number or which research you read, it's somewhere around 6% of the population have access to reticulated power, which is one of the worst power levels in the world. And this population deserves power. And when you have power, you have schools, you have internet access, you have a whole range of services that allows the broader population to live their skills.
Some of the initiatives you're taking in that
So
regard?
we've been involved in a number of power opportunities. Biomass project in Morro Bay. We've just recently signed a 15 megawatt with another 15 megawatt option power offtake agreement with PNG Power. We've got a Highlands power supply for the Tari region, which we think is very important. You can't be sending billions of kilos worth of gas off to Japan to give them power and not have power in the local population. We're also looking at small-scale LNG supplies and CNG for travels, compressed natural gas for travel. We've got a whole group looking at power generation, and although they're small-scale, they're very, very important in the social context of our social license to operate and social stability in our regions. So we think this is a very important part, and I know that there are other projects in Western Province that are also looking at power projects. So I think that's the next phase of domestic market usage for gas will be, and throw in some biomass as well, trees. We think that's an important, albeit small, industry growth area for Papua New Guinea in the next 5 years.
To sum up, I would like each of you to indicate maybe some areas that you think government should be more proactive or should be doing more in terms of promoting this the resources sector. Dr. Temu?
I think I raised the issue of the legislation. That's a key area. During this downturn, that's the last thing we need to try and change the laws and the rules. The wise thing to do as a country would be to hold on to all those until the price scenarios change. So I do hope that the current government will take a decision along those lines.
Mr. Botton?
Yeah, I think reiterating stability. We all know we're going into an election period. Election period's a challenging time when a lot of the politicians obviously are away doing their campaigning. At the end of the day, a lot of business then stops because the arms of government don't work. And I'd encourage industry and government to get together as soon as we can in 2016 so that we don't see a huge trough in activity and approvals during the election period, sort of starting in early 17. Stability through that period and a peaceful election remain a very high priority to maintain investor confidence.
Mr. Aitsi, as Senior Vice President of the PNG Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, you have a broad perspective. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think, Brian, as we've covered through the interview, I think the work is really for us to perhaps harness the revenues that come through the resource sector, and for our government particularly to translate this income, this revenue, into broad-based economic growth within our country. One of the things that I'm mindful of is that our population is not stagnant. Our population continues to grow. So we're up to around about 7.2 million now. Some people say it's even higher than that. So when you take that as an indicator, as a development statistic, we need to understand the impact of that in terms of our own economy. And if we do that, then it tells us that we need to take the resources that we have. We need to try and maximise the kind of income that comes from those resources, and then we need to apply that income to broad-based economic activity so that more of our population can be involved in the economy. And as a result, we can empower our communities beyond just dependency on the resource sector. As we start to do that and we invest into strategic infrastructure that will allow that to happen, power, public roads and bridges and so on, then I think that's probably, for me, is probably the most important discussion that we need to have. And I suppose from a government's point of view, the most important work that they need to commit to and perhaps understand the impact it'll have.
With that, we bring this panel discussion to a close, and I wish to thank our panelists, Dr. Temu, Mr. Botten, and Mr. Aitsi, for a very interesting and insightful discussion on the interaction of the PNG resources sector and the PNG economy. Thank you.